A lot of times we don't see those sacrifices that are being made. We don't know about the families of the warriors and how they miss them and how they have to fill in for their roles while they're gone. We see that they're fighting, but we don't know much more than that. Their sacrifices go way deeper than we can ever think or imagine. And so these warriors do so much for the people. Now, all of us know that David is the ultimate warrior. He battled a giant. He was there to protect his people, to protect his lands. And that's what our warriors do too. It takes a lot to be able to make those kind of sacrifices. And when they have God behind them, their power is mighty. Because we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Our warriors are, I've been serving on the auxiliary back at Haskell for the Haskell Color Guard. And I've learned a lot about veterans. My father was served in the U.S. Marine Corps during the Korean conflict. And I didn't know much about it. But after seeing and meeting our warriors and hearing their stories and hearing about what they've been through and the humor that they have that goes way over my head, it tells me that there's a brotherhood. There's a camaraderie. They're a family. And they were taught not to share a lot of the things that have happened to them. But now they are starting to share that with each other, and to see that is a tremendous thing. If you ever get a chance to help out an organization for our veterans, I encourage you to do it. It's not the kind of sacrifice that they have made, but to see a warrior look and to be honored by people who appreciate what they've done, it really goes a long way. And it doesn't have to be much, but that little bit just shows how much they have done for us. My dad never heard me say thank you for your service, but I say it all the time when I see a veteran, because it's like I'm telling my dad thank you for what you've done for me. And I want to just say that with David being the warrior that he was and being connected to God, that's what our warriors are like too. They're connected to the land. They're connected to God. They're connected to things, and their bond is stronger than any kind of faith I've ever seen, because they take it seriously. It's not just something that they can just do and have an experience. They don't talk about the crazy things that happen all the time. They really take to heart that sacrifice that they make. So thank a veteran today and do what you can. When you see someone that you know that has served, buy them their lunch. Tell them thank you. Do anything you can to let them know that you appreciate what you've done, what they've done, because it's a tremendous effort that neither of us could probably even think or imagine that we could do. Thank you to our veterans and for all that they've done. Let us pray. We thank you, O God, for our warriors. We thank you for their commitment to leave the people and the lands to go and to protect, to take on a great sacrifice. Many of them have not returned to the land, but Lord, we know that their heart is still here. We ask that you will be with our warriors today as they continue to teach us and to show us the importance of having that sacrifice. We ask that you will be with them, that you will bless them today. Be with them in their time, because we know that they go through a lot during this time. They remember things that they don't want to remember, but at the same time, they can't explain what we don't know. Help us to pray for them, to uplift them, and to remember them in all that we do, so that they can know that we appreciate what they have done for us. thank you, O God, for your sacrifice too, the sacrifice of your Son, Jesus Christ, who died for each and every one of us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
I guess I should go first. My name is Connie Evans, and I served in the Army Nurse Corps from 1966 to 1969. I served in Vietnam with the 12th Evacuation Hospital attached to the 25th Infantry Division. And then I served in Germany until my discharge.
Randy Bowen, United States Navy. I served with the 7th Fleet off of Vietnam on the USS Midway. And later on, had a career for 22 years, and I got caught up in Desert Storm right at the end.
I'm a Taylor Senior. I served with the B Battery, 13th Artillery, 25th Infantry Division. I served in Danelle from 66, 67.
Doug Chambers, U.S. Army, from 67 to 69, served in Nam from 68 to 69.
Cheryl White, International Guard, 1980 to 83. I was based in Seattle. I did serve in Korea for a few months as well.
I did not know that Cheryl was a veteran, and I've known her for a while. Also, I'm sorry.
Mark Garrison served in Germany, 84 to 87 in the U.S. Army.
Raising, could we all stand and sing the Star Spangled Banner as it starts rising?
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red flame, the bombs bursting in air, gave through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
So I just found out a minute ago that I'm going to take over from Auntie Tony Garcia, which I'm happy to do. Just thankful that I attended the ceremony this morning and listened to my Grandma Connie talk. And I was fortunate to go to Washington, D.C. in November with my Grandma Connie, and she spoke at the Vietnam War Memorial Wall. She did a really an amazing job at the Vietnam Wall, and she talked about her experiences as a nurse there. And I had not heard her story ever, so just listening to all the things that her and her colleagues went through with the warriors coming back injured, and how she had to provide care for them, and the amount of things that she had to witness, you know, as a nurse, and the amount of trauma, I was just like, wow, that would have, you know, taken me out and have to witness all that. So I really even put her up higher on a pedestal for what she's done for our country, and she's Nini Poo, and she really takes care of our family and our tribe, and I was just really proud of her, and I was really happy to be there. And we brought 19 Perce veterans over to Washington, D.C., and at first I didn't want to go because I was kind of scared to bring 19 elders from Spokane over to Washington, D.C., get them on the plane, get them through the city, navigating Washington, D.C., and also getting them all to the different events that were going on. So there was, they had an honoring at the Native Center, and then some went to listen to Connie. So I was really trying to figure out how to get the elders here and there. And some of the elders I didn't know until the trip. So I was really thankful I got to know like Badge Arthur. I didn't know Badge Arthur that well until after that trip. And we just had a really good time, and I know God was watching over us because I was able to get the elders bussed around DC, and I even had to use my phone and Uber some of the elders to go eat out and stuff like that. And I also had to run to Walmart to get elders like their Powerade and their snacks and things like that. So, yeah, and it was just a really good time. And with that, I'm going to introduce an elder, Wilfred Scott. I've known Wilfred pretty much all my life, and I know he served with my Auntie Jenny on NPTC, and I've known his wife, Bessie, really well, because I worked at the Head Start for 5 years, and actually I have one of my students, Trayvon here, I taught him in Tumumno room. But Bessie came in and she did all our language, and I learned a lot of our language from her just by listening to it every week, and the songs she taught us, the colors, our body parts, how you greet. So I just learned a lot from her, and I really got to know her just working at Head Start for 5 years, and really thankful for her. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Wilfred Scott to speak.
You know, a couple of months ago, I had a visit from the lady he was talking about, from Tonia. And anyway, she asked me if I would come up and talk about veterans. And without hesitation, I said, sure, I'll be glad to go up and talk about veterans. Maybe I should have hesitated. The reason is I got on my laptop and picked up my prior presentations, and I had talked about veterans. And I remember at that time, and I asked Beth, what should I talk about? I talked about veterans. Every Veterans Day I talk about veterans. We go someplace, we talk about veterans. I've talked about our veterans year in and year out. What should I talk about? She says, talk about your life. I got to thinking, I can't talk about myself. I've never done that before. So I came up then, and I talked a little bit about veterans, but then I started talking about the ancestors of veterans who participated in the War of 1877. And then later on, I was invited again. And I tried to tell the invitee that, you know, I've already been up there a couple of times. And I said, well, you're going to come up again. So I accepted and came up. Again, I asked Bess, I said, what should I talk about this time? She said, talk about your life. I couldn't talk about my life, so I came up. Many of you here, you probably remember I talk about kids. The things that kids say and do. I was really feeling good about both them presentations. And then when I got this one, and as I said, I hesitated. Because my memory, just like my laptop, you know, you put it on sleep and it goes to sleep. Anyway, is it still on? Anyway, I've always put my talk in writing. And the reason for that is I like to keep things in sequence. I don't like to go back and forth, repeat or whatever. And also sometimes I get started on a sentence and maybe I hesitate for some reason, get distracted, and then I forget what I was going to say the rest of the sentence. And I have to sit here and kind of, what do I do now? So anyway, that's where I got started. And I got to thinking about an old saying, don't change your horse in midstream. I remembered that. I decided, I'm going to go ahead and change my horse in midstream. So I did, I changed horses. Kind of a poor choice for the horse, I guess. Poor horse drowned halfway across the river. Anyway, with all due respect, I decided to talk about veterans, two in particular. Also, as we go along, you'll notice that my talk is in storybook form, or maybe story paragraph form. Each paragraph will have a story. And some of this goes back to what Bess had said, talk about your life. And this is not going to be about my life. This is going to be about a man who was born in Lapway, a lady who was born in Spalding, Wakipa, a long time ago. Or as the young ones would say, way back in the West, way back in ancient times. The man's early memory starts around 1937. That's when he was placed in the sanatorium at Lapway. And he would stay there and he would live a military type life until he reached 9 years old. Every place they went, they marched. They marched back and forth from the dormitory to the cafeteria, where they ate. They marched to school and back. They marched everywhere. They not only marched everywhere, sometimes they went different directions. Some would go that way. Some would go that way. That's the way they were. March, march, march. Just like in an army. You hear the army marching. Hut, 2, 3, 4. Her left, her left, her left, right, left. All that was to keep the army straight. In the Navy, we didn't march with that. Her left, her left. In the Navy, we all knew our left from our right. In addition to knowing, young people, they ran all over the country, all over the valley of Lapway, from Spalding to Webb, all the hills, all the canyons in between. And they knew where everything was at in them areas. If they wanted an apple, they knew where the apple tree was. Everything they knew. The only thing that they tried to make sure was available was a good spring with cold water and some thick bushes nearby. Them are the only things that they really decided they might need later on. before they left home each day. There was usually 5, maybe 6 of them. And they would tear these shiny pieces of paper, pages, out of a Susan Roebuck Monkey Ward's catalog. They would fold them up and put them in their hip pocket. And that's before they left to go out in the hills to play. These pages weren't to read. They were to be used in case of an emergency. You never know when an emergency would come up. And you had to grab them little piece of paper and run for some dark bushes. That's where the restroom was at. Some of you old timers might remember taking that little sheet of paper and wrinkling it up in your knuckles. Was that to get the paper soft? Or was that to make it skid-free and puncture-proof? These guys danced under the bleachers at Fencers on the Hall. Of course, the bleachers, I think, are only about 3 or 4 high. They only went probably from here to the wall. Pretty low to dance under, so probably the only dance they could do was a duck and dive. So they mastered that one pretty well. In fact, they danced everywhere. Everywhere they went, they would war dance. They'd be walking along when all of a sudden one of them would start dancing away. Next thing you know, they're all dancing. Just dancing up a storm. Down the railroad tracks, along the highway, down an alley, across somebody's yard. They danced everywhere. In Lapway, there used to be an old shed. It was a 2-story, doorless. Upstairs, no doors. The doorways were there, no windows. One day they were up there war dancing. They were just dancing up a storm. All of a sudden they happened to miss a dancer. You know, they look around, where's so-and-so? Where'd he go? Somebody went over and looked out the window, and there he was, standing on the ground down below, brushing dirt off his clothes. He dashed right out the door, swoosh, down to the ground he went. He didn't get hurt. Maybe he should have been wearing a parachute, who knows. Riding horses. One of our elders always let us ride horses across the creek. All we had to do was take care of them ourselves. So we decided we wanted to ride a horse, we'd go over, put the bridle on, jump on bareback, start out the barn. The barn door only happened to be so high, so when you went out, you had to duck. As a horse would duck, sometimes somebody behind you would be hollering, trying to get your attention, make you turn around. You never wanted to turn around when you got that doorway, because swoosh off the back of the horse you would go. Knowing the horses were not barn broke, you had to check your clothes, make sure you didn't have a bunch of road apples stuck in your pockets or wherever. I'm sure many of you remember seeing the old cavalry barn just south on the agency grounds, south of the parade grounds, close to one of the housing, the big white building. They used to play in there. They'd climb up in the rafters like this. A lot of the hay down there. They'd jump down in the hay. One day this one, he happened to spot a nest. Looked at the nest, checked it out. Bunch of pigeon eggs in there. Picked one up and he's looking at it. Seen his friend standing there and just like that. Splat right on the back. Pigeon eggs all over the place. A couple of them after that battle, they wore the scars of that battle. Dried pigeon eggs all over their clothes. In the wintertime, when everything was freezing over, they would hike down to Spalding. Right next to the train bridge there used to be a pond that would freeze over. And they would play a shinny out there on that pond. Street shoes, no skates or nothing. They could get going and slip and slide, but they couldn't turn, they couldn't stop. Once they got going, they just had to keep going until they fell or ran into something. Most of them, they spent a lot of time on their behinds. Then when they got done, they'd have to hike back to Lapway. Time they get back to Lapway, and after all the sliding around there on the pond, they'd be soaking wet from their knees down. These are the type of things that they enjoyed. Just like the lady said about the veterans. Snow sledding. I think some of you have seen the big ski range up above the hill behind senior citizens. That's where they used to go up and they would ride sleds down. They had haystacks towards the end. If you didn't, you could go right on over and off of that cliff. So usually the only way to stop was just to ram into one of them haystacks. And some of them would. And the others have to go up and grab by the heels and pull them out. But at least it kept them from going over the cliff. There used to be a barbed wire fence that went across that field. So they took the bottom strand off, took some staples out of the post, pulled it up, and hooked it onto the next strand above. So anyway, that barbed wire was like an A-frame. Then they would take a couple of big white rags and they would tie one on each end. That was to show them where the pathway under the barbed wire fence went. And if you happen to be sledding, and when you arrived, if or when you arrived at that fence, you better be between them two rags. There was rules on that. You had to be between the rags. If you didn't, there's no saying. I don't know whether it's in the Army or not, but I know in the Navy we had that saying. Your heart may belong to your girlfriend, but when you came under that barbed wire, your rear end belonged to that fence. And you didn't want to give your rear end to that fence. Another thing they did was every year at Mud Camp, that's the place across the butte, all the kids would be lined up. That was for their whip cleansing. The whip cleansing was to atone for all the misdeeds they had done during the year. As soon as Uncle Shine appeared out in the middle of the camp with his chair and his whip, kids had to be lined up. But the old-timers, they skedaddled. They knew when to leave, and gone they were. One of the fathers must have been an attorney. They had a little boy was there, and the little boy, he was plea bargaining. Well, he was plea bargaining up a storm. No, Daddy, I won't do it anymore. No, Daddy, oh, Daddy. Yes, Daddy, I'll do that. Yes, Daddy, I'll do that. He was plea bargaining up a storm, but it didn't do any good. He still faced that line. The others had already took off to hide. It just so happened they picked a bad place to hide. Over by the butte. There they were. They were having a great time. There was a big old rotten stump there, and they were just stomping that stump to pieces, kicking it, bouncing on it, everything. That piece of that stump was flying all over bark here and there. That is until some residents of that stump decided enough was enough, and they launched a biting attack. Red ants, hundreds of them. If you thought them kids jumping around, if you thought they were war dancing, no, they weren't war dancing. They were dancing all right. But their dancing was to try to get the ants in the pants, out of the pants. Those ants won the battle. They had 5 naked boys running down that butte. You know, I talk about ants. He remembered the first pair of dress pants that he ever borrowed and wore. He borrowed from his dad. Had a pair of size 40 pants on a size 30 waist. And today the kids, you know, they think they came up with that baggy, saggy style, you know. But no, they didn't have nothing on this guy. And it wasn't hard to run every day from Lapway to Spalding and another 2 miles south of Spalding to visit your girlfriend. He would graduate 1949, and he would spend a couple of years as a cat skinner. For you young people, a cat skinner is what they call a person who operates a Caterpillar tractor. They don't call him that because he skins cats. No, he didn't skin cats. The woman would graduate in 1951. The Korean War would be underway. He enlisted in the Navy. On that day, he became a warrior. When he returned from recruit training, they would get married, and she became a warrior. During that time, they would make their homes in 4 different states in this country. He would serve on 4 different ships. He would visit 13 different countries and islands in the Pacific. Most of the time he was gone, she took care of the household, the family by herself. And during his tour, while he served an 18-month tour in Vietnam, she applied for and was busy for that time building our home, a home they would live in until he retired from the Navy in 1972. During that time, she told stories about her and her friend. They didn't know how to read a ruler. Therefore, every 16th of an inch became a notch. Where they got the term notch, I don't know. But under their theory, 2 feet 2 inches was 2 feet 2 inches. Under their way of thinking, 2 feet 2.5 inches became 2 feet, 2 inches, and 8 notches. I think I would have drove any carpenter crazy. I could see some carpenter, hey, this board's too long, we gotta trim off about 5 notches. But nonetheless, they always bragged that their work was far better than some of the work the men were doing. They said they had to sometimes take some of the men's work apart and redo it for them. She was always proud of that. And of course, the guy, he couldn't say anything. He couldn't say anything in defense of his friends. Is this thing still on? Like I said, the guy couldn't say anything in defense of his friends because he didn't know the difference between a hanger, a soffit, or a joist from a doorknob. That's how much carpenter he knew. In civilian life, they were staunch believers in tribal rights. One of the man's favorite stories was one day him and 2 of his friends were up Lochsaw, they were road hunting. And they were coming down. They'd already went up towards the line and they were coming back down river. And they passed this fishing game vehicle. And as they passed it, the officer in the vehicle made eye contact with them. And after they got by, looked in the rear view mirror, he'd made a complete U-turn. As he caught up with him, he had his lights flashing, he pulled him over. So he pulled over and stopped. And the man, he got out, said, I better see what's going on here. He got out and walked it back. And the officer told him, he says, and he didn't tell him, he asked him, he says, can I see your rifles? And the man says, what rifles? What makes you think we got rifles? And the officer says, well, you're hunting, ain't you? And the guy says, well, what makes you think we're hunting? He said, I got the rifle out and he showed each one of them to the officer. Showed him that no clip was in place and there was no round in the chamber. Of course, that's all the officers were interested in, was finding a loaded gun. The man told him, he said, hey, this car coming here. Stop them and see if they're hunting. See if they have rifles. The guy looked, the car went by, and he said, well, did they have rifles? And the officer says, I don't know. He says, well, next one come, he says, stop them and ask them if they're hunting. The officer looked at him and kind of shook his head and got his vehicle and left. And the guy thought, gee, I thought that guy might have had x-ray vision, but I guess he didn't after all. He left. Earlier I talked about the woman building the house, taking care of the kids. And her primary education started at the old Clearwater School. That's on the Coyote Grade, just downriver from Spalding. And she went to Arlene, Montana for a while. Then came back to Spalding and then finished her grade school there at the Spalding School, and that school still stands. Then she would enter high school at Lapley. In high school, she was an outstanding 4-year athlete. She also participated in all school dramas and all class plays. She had roles in all of them. She was also a 4-year cheerleader. After retiring, she spent many years working with Head Start. And after retiring, she used to go to the homecoming games there at Lapway at the football field. And when all the prior cheerleaders were asked to come out and join the current cheerleaders, they would get out there. As the young would say, they come off to show their ancient routines. Everything is ancient to the young people. You know, in her 80s, she was already in her 80-year-old. She couldn't do the splits anymore, but she could sure yell. And yell she did. A true veteran at heart, she dedicated herself, as was pointed out earlier by the young man that introduced me. In this Perce language, keeping it going, passing it on with the culture. She never rejected a request from anyone for help in translating English into Nimipu. Many a night she could be seen sitting at her table, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning with her dictionary, going over something to interpret. For her efficiency in the language and culture, she was recognized and honored by the Nez Perce tribe, by Lewis and Clark State College, and by the state of Idaho. Great honors were bestowed on her. She earned and deserved every one of them. Everyone and everything was important to her. She always reminded the young people, you are special. You are a special, unique person, an individual. She would also tell them, excuse me, she'd always tell them, no one is better than you, but also you're no better than anyone else. Don't ever forget that. She worried about things not getting done. You would see her at a dinner at a memorial powwow, always scurrying around, helping out with something. One day the man told her, why don't you sit down and let the young ones do that? She just turned and looked at him, and very calmly she screamed, you sit down. Said he plopped down so fast, so hard, thought he almost broke his tailbone. But that's the way she was. Whenever she said to jump, he didn't ask how high, he just started going up. He also knew that when her eyes started to squint, when her jaw muscles started to flex, he knew then and there he better be sitting or getting ready to jump. One of her favorite sayings, whenever she'd hear somebody say, shoulda, I should have done this, I should have done that, she would mutter, shoulda, shoulda, shoulda. The man said he heard that 1,000 times. Probably because most of them were directed at him. She was most proud of the role she played in life, the role that her ancestors played, and she didn't know what they had went through. But when she found out that they were deeply involved in the War of 1877, it tore at her heart. Many times at these memorials, she would sit there and cry. because of what had happened to them. 2 of them were killed in battle. One is buried at the Bearpaw battlefield. The other one is buried along the war trail, unmarked grave south of Wisdom, Montana. The other 2 were both wounded in battle. Both of them shed their blood. And rather than surrender, they fled into Canada. They stayed there for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, they figured it was safe to come back. So they started on their way back. When they got to the Spokane Reservation, they were told that all those that were coming back from Canada were being taken into custody and shipped to Oklahoma. So they stayed with the Spokane tribe for another couple of years. Following that, when things started dying down, they finally made it back to the reservation. And there they would live out the rest of their lives with this lady's parents who took care of them. Her grandfather passed away in 1912. Her grandmother, great-grandmother, passed away in 1938. She was 98 years old. The woman did not know that them people were her relatives until we started doing the memorials. That was way after 1977. At the urging of some of her friends that she really expected, some of the old ladies, they finally encouraged her to take the name of her grandmother. Not her great-grandmother, but her grandmother. And she took that name. Hiyuyanmai, grizzly bear woman. And I'm always reminded of the grizzly bear woman. I wear that shirt whenever I talked about her. I'm going to end this storytelling with what I call the chief story. Years ago, I would often call my friend, and some of you remember him, Gilbert Towner. The phone would ring, and his wife happened to be my sister-in-law, his bestest sister, Geneva, would always answer the phone. And I'd say, let me speak to the chief. She would hand me the phone, and I would talk to Gilbert. And whatever I want to talk about, we'd talk, finally get done, and hang up. This went on for a couple of years. I'd call and talk to the chief. One day I called, and she answered the phone, and I said, let me speak to the chief. Hesitated for a moment, and then she answered, you're talking to her. Wow, just like that, my friend had been demoted. Clipped of his tail feathers. That Christmas, 2 sweatshirts came in the mail from the Towners. Bess handed me one. I took it, held it up. Had sub-chief embroidered on it. And when I took it, I said, hey, you gave me the wrong one. She said, read the tag. I picked up the sweatshirt. Scotty. Looked at her, and she held hers up, held out the tag. BESS, embroidered chief. Just like that, I was demoted. nude of my tail feathers. Truthfully, she was my chief. Was and still is. You all know my chief loved working with children and enjoyed coming here every year. She would say, hey, I wouldn't ask where to. I just grabbed the keys, jump in the car. 45 minutes, we'd be parked right out that door. That's the way she was. I not only knew when to sit or jump, I knew when to drive. In memory of her, I see some of my family are here. We have a donation that we want to make to this group to help the cost with today's activities and tonight's wiener roast. The treasurer is here. Where's your treasurer? Honor and memory of Bessie Green Scott. Hey, you me at my. There's a check in there, you.
Okay.
It's a cashier.
Is it a cashier? While Scotty is sitting here, we've had him speak many times, and I always try to say, you want some gas money or, $100. Oh, no, you just keep that for the program. So thank you on behalf of the Talmaks. Appreciate that.
You can
You want to see it?
you can present it to him if you want. There's a mic.
Oh my gosh, he presented $1,000 to Talmaks. That's the IRL.
I knew from the very beginning that each of you knew who the two warrior veterans were. If she were here, she would say, you were all special. What you don't know is she sat with me. Many tears were shed while putting this paper together. She is here right now. Right there. In honor of her, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity to take you down a small piece of memory lane with the two of us and to talk about some very special people, our ancestors, our veterans, and each of you, every one of you. In past years, as I mentioned earlier, when I was asked to talk, I didn't want to talk about myself. I talked about other things. Today we got a little piece of myself snuck into it. Back in 1972, when I first got involved in politics, Uncle Gene called me aside and he told me, he said, Sonny, just be yourself. Just be yourself. Don't try to be anything else. Don't ever try to be anything else. Be yourself. I am co-host to Smoke the Luin, Raven playing in the black dust. That name was given to me by an uncle. I've never met this guy, Robert, but I understand he often decides if something is non-debatable or not. Uncle Gene said, don't try to be something you're not. I don't try to be a medicine man. I don't try to be a septiminute, a teacher. I have never skinned a cat. And I am not a dingbat. Non-debatable, non-debatable. As a grandpa, I want to share something with you. I keep this by my bed on my headstand in an envelope. And it's been there for quite a few years. Every now and then I take it out and I read it. I know our time is limited and the Creator will call us home one day. Just want to tell you how much I appreciate all you have done for me in my life. You were there when I gaffed my first salmon, shot my first deer, shot my first gun. You took me sweat for the first time, showed me how to use a chainsaw, dropped my first tree, took me to my first memorial and told me why. Traveled to Mississippi for my graduation, ride my fur bike on solo, seen my first snow. You were there when I got my first and only speeding ticket. You listened to my songs, took me to my first powwow, saw me dance for the first time. You told me to keep my nose clean, and I did through all these years, even when my friends were letting theirs stay dirty. I want to thank you for everything you have done for me. There will always be a place in my heart forever for you and Allah. Thank you for being there. It's hard to find people in this world to trust. I wish there were more people like my grandparents. It would take me 2 lifetimes to accomplish what you did with Zip 1. October 7th, 2018. The title on it is A Text to Grandpa. My grandson sitting in the back there. Today, from an old man's trip down memory lane, I talked about a young boy's escapades with his friends. I talked a little bit of what the man is not, invoking that Guy Roberts rules of order, of course. I shared with you a whole lot about what he hopes to be remembered by in his treasured A Text to Grandpa. Now, since I agreed to talk about veterans, I'll turn to them for a couple of moments. In 1877, the following words were spoken at the Bear Paw battlefield. Our chiefs are killed. All the old men are dead. It is young men who say yes or no. Someday at various organizations of veterans, similar words may soon be spoken. Similar words. The World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, veterans are all gone. It is the young veterans who will say yes or no. It is the young veterans who will take over our duties, our responsibilities. Let's hope and pray they do.
Can we have one more round of applause for our speaker today?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for the good music.